the season is shifting from Summerween to Falloween. And I'm already feeling those autumn vibes. That means it's time for new adventures, crafty ones of course. And I've got a few spooky projects lined up. I'm going to be transforming a thrifted jack-o'-lantern bag with a custom strap that's as comfy as it is festive. I'll be crafting some bewitching cauldron earrings, bubbling over with baubles. I'll be giving my desk familiar a tiny witch's hat, because every cat, ceramic or not, deserves a little Halloween magic. Let's rescue this thrifted jack-o'-lantern bag. It's cute, but this ain't it. It's giving more trick than treat. So I'm swapping it out for something custom, comfy, and perfectly festive. Let's look at our fabric options. So when I look at the options together with the bag, I think the Whimsigoth fabric and the spider webs are the least busy. So I'm going to take out the Nightmare Before Christmas options, although I love those. I have very little of the moon and stars, so I think I'm going to work with the spider webs. That'll give me the best chance of success, and I think that looks really sharp together. Next step, onto the iron. So because I don't have enough fabric to cut it on the straight grain, I'm going to be cutting it on the weft. This is selvage end to selvage end. I've got this folded. Right now I've got the ruler lined up against the fold, and I want to just even up the end here. A bit at the end. So I've got that squared up. I know I want my bag to be, or my strap to be, about 58 inches long, and it also needs some excess for each side strap for the D-ring, about maybe 2 inches on each side. So if we measure here, we've got 22 from the fold, so about 44. I'm going to have to cut 2 straps and seam them together. Now my favorite crossbody has a 1 1/4 inch strap. The way we construct the crossbody strap by folding twice, a double fold, we take the 1 1/4 and we multiply by 4, giving us 5 inches. All right, that's much better. So the first cut, 4 inches, because I started my line on the 1. Again, I think that's just trying to film and do it at the same time. You're going to watch me suffer a little bit, and that's okay. I'll save this for something else and set this all aside. I'm matching up the right sides of the fabric to each other and drawing a diagonal line to guide my sewing of a mitered seam. I'm choosing to do it this way to help eliminate some of the bulk a straight seam would cause, but you could certainly do a straight seam as well. Okay, so now our line is sewn, and I'm just going to cut off the excess. Just going to do it with scissors because I've already put my cutting mat away. Making sure that everything's cool. Now when it's open, we've got a nice flat strap. I'm gonna go take this to the ironing board and get that pressed out. To add strength and stability to the strap, I'm ironing on interfacing. I'm using Pellon SF101. So I wouldn't be distracted, I pre-cut the interfacing to match the strap size off camera. So the old adage of measure twice, cut once, well, when you're paying attention to what your camera is doing and not where your measurements fall, you're gonna make mistakes. So in this case, instead of a 5-inch piece, I cut a 4-inch piece. Luckily, I had enough fabric to resolve the issue and cut a second 5-inch piece. But always proceed with caution. Now let's carry on to ironing the strap down so we can sew it up. First, I iron the entire strap in half. Then I iron the edges in toward that new center fold. I next press the strap back in half, which will be our final strap width. I folded the ends of the strap in and pressed them down to keep the ends neat for the sewing steps. Off camera, I had cut the strap to length prior to ironing. Now I cut the 2 O-ring loops from the remaining piece and ironed them to match the strap width. At this point, we have the ironed loops and the ironed straps. These are all ready to go. I've ironed them in half, so now we can head to the sewing machine. At the sewing machine, I sewed all 4 sides of both loops. I should note that my top stitch thread is orange and my bobbin thread is black. I did this intentionally so that the top stitching would have a nice contrast to the fabric and match up with the bag, while the bottom stitching would visually disappear. With both loops sewn, I started sewing the strap. At this point, I had noticed a few things. The stitch length that I was using was very small and not giving me the top stitching aesthetic I was going for. It was fine for the loop straps, but I wanted something different for the strap. The lovely pumpkin colored thread I was using was almost out. And the top stitching I had been doing was very close to the edge, so I wanted to make that closer to 1/4 inch away from the edge. So I ripped out what I'd already sewn on the strap, rethreaded the machine with a brighter orange thread that I had on hand, and adjusted the stitch length. Let's see how it goes with those changes. Better. Alright, at this point I have switched out to a zipper foot and I'm going to work on installing the hardware. This slider for adjusting the width on a crossbody I borrowed from a bag that I had worn out. I'm going to take the right side and then the right side, not where the hooks kind of connect, but where it's all flat. I'm going to go up and then back through, and then give some seam allowance here and see if I can get this sewn. All right, well, I got this one side sewn down. Due to this being where it was, I could not kind of turn the corner to make the box, so I'm gonna just try to now approach this from the other side here. I could switch out to the other foot at this point, but I'm just gonna try to make a go of it. This was a challenge. There's quite a bit of fabric for the machine to tackle, and the slider made working with this awkward. I'm going to grab my sewing needle and work these threads down in through to provide extra security, clean it up, and we'll move on to deconstructing the seams on the bag. Okay, how are we doing here? Let's get these chains off. Lovely ASMR that. All right, so now I am just going to work with my seam ripper and my snips to try to get the bag open. I sure wish it had gone this quickly in real time. I had to go slow to be careful not to damage anything when clipping the stitches. All right, made it in. I'm gonna clean it up and work on the other side. So I've got the seams free on both sides. Next step is to take the O-rings in the loops and sew them down into the sides. This is gonna be hand sewing, so I can try to match up all the holes there, and we'll see how we make out. Slow and tedious hand sewing. So exciting. For your enjoyment, I've edited this way down and sped up what's left. The highlights, I kept to the same stitch holes that were already there and tried avoiding tangling the thread in the zipper. Also, I had to measure a lot to make sure the loop was even as I sewed it in. All right, there's one in. I'm gonna go back through just over all of these stitches again just to reinforce them, and then do the same thing on the other side. Our jack-o'-lantern bag now has its adorable little earrings. Now we'll work on getting the strap in place. The way I like to wear my bags, I'm gonna put the slider on this side. So to do that, I'm going to take the strap, put the top stitching towards the bag, so the good side. Keep everything nicely aligned so that essentially you get to where you have a loop, top stitching, and the top of the slider. That's the bottom where we'd fixed it. So now, I'll try to do this in one swoop. I'll take the top side of the tail, come in from the bottom, then go over the top and pull that through. So essentially you end up with it looped on. Too close. That looped on and adjustable. Right there. Cool. So now the last task here is to sew that in place. So we'll get it clipped, sewn.
And we'll come back for the final reveal of all of these projects at the end of this video. Now that my bag was done, I was moving on to bewitching accessories. Here are my concept sketches for some cauldron earrings. I have two different ideas. The first, a more traditional cauldron hung over a fire with potion beads bubbling up and out. The second idea was a cauldron being tipped over and potion spilling out of it. To get ready for these cauldron earrings, I pulled together all the beads that look like potion bubbles, plus any tools and bits and bobs that may come in handy for brewing up some crafty magic.
I have my 3D printed cauldrons. Very cool. My thought is to go with the kind of tilted bead spilling out situation. The way I think I'm going to tackle that is to take some bead caps, very tiny, where I can attach different beads from the different circles, glue one of these into the cauldron, so get in there, so that the beads then come spilling out. Then I should be able to use my pin vise to drill a hole for a jump ring and then put the ear wire on from there. So I'm going to turn on one of my favorite podcasts, It's Always Halloween, and give it a go. If it doesn't work, I can always print more of these and try something different. So let's start working on beads off the bead cap.
First, I'm taking some black bead wire and I'm going to put a crimp bead at the end of it so that any beads that I add to it won't fall off. I chose the black bead wire so that it would hopefully visually disappear. And then I tried to determine how much I would need to spill out of the cauldron. I doubled this up a little bit so that I would have beads on the wire. Then the wire would go through the bead cap, down out a different spaced hole, more beads on, and then a crimp bead at the end there. So I was getting more spills off of one length of wire. The only caveat here I would recommend if you try to do these yourself is add a little bit more slack in the end so that the beads dangle a little bit more naturally. I had the tension too tight when I did this, so they do hang and dangle, but they're not as overflowing as I'd hoped that they would be. In terms of the beads I was choosing, I really loved the iridescent oil slick beads. They really felt like they were some sort of malevolent potion. Otherwise, I was just varying the sizes and colors to what looked nice. Now that I have beads strung through the bead cap, I'm finishing this particular loop with another crimp bead. Then I'll trim off the excess wire. At this point, I'm going to repeat that entire process for the same earring, adding more spills and dangles for the same cauldron. With this round, I varied the size of the dangle so they weren't all evenly dangling out. There would be a variety of how far the potion bubbles were spilling. I also made sure again to vary the size and color of the beads just to provide visual interest. It's not a homogeneous potion, it's a potion filled with all sorts of things. Here's how that turned out, temporarily placed in the cauldron. Then it was time to repeat that process for a second earring. Using my pin vise, I drilled a small hole for the jump ring. I added an ear wire, then I closed the jump ring with my pliers. Next step, repeat that process for the second cauldron, making sure that the jump ring lands in about the same place so that they look symmetrical, but this isn't necessary. Using the bead cap as the base for the beads made the final assembly really easy. I just used a dollop of hot glue and smushed it into the cauldron. We'll see how these turned out in the reveal. I didn't plan on making both cauldron concepts, but I already had everything I needed out, so I went for it. I measured 3 equidistant points on the cauldron and used the pin vise to create the holes for the jump rings. I measured and cut 6 lengths of chain. I used some pins and a piece of cork to help me keep everything even. I then added 3 of those pieces of chain and an ear wire to a jump ring. For this project, I used an earring stand to help keep things untangled so I can appropriately attach the chains in the right spot on the cauldron. Once I had the chains ready, I used jump rings to attach each one to the 3 positions on the cauldron. I'm hot gluing in a large bead to fill up a lot of the empty space in the cauldron. Using super glue, I started the process of attaching other beads to that foundational bead.
Today's video is a bit of a monster mashup of crafts. Is it because I have 9,000 hobbies and flip from one to the other like a crafty butterfly? Maybe. Yesterday I finished up the cauldron earrings. Unfortunately, my camera battery did die while I was filming the gluing of the beads process. I took a larger bead and securely hot glued it into the cauldron. This helped fill up the void as well as give a good foundation to glue all the other beads on. I tried to be strategic when gluing on the beads to cover the holes of the other beads to make them look less like beads and more like bubbles. I did find that these were just so fun to make that I wanted to make more. I haven't yet, but I think of all the variations that you could do with this. You could print the cauldrons in a pastel filament or paint them different colors. You could add summerween coated beads so that they're bright and fit the vibe in the summer when you want something a little bit spooky but a little bit summery as well. You could add different charms, bones, bats, stars and moons, things that really personalize it and zhuzh them up a bit. They were just a heck of a lot of fun. While I used this as a project to stash bust, I only had to print the cauldron files, and I found those on Thingiverse, so I will drop that link in the description below. Today's project is based in 80s nostalgia, the porch goose. Those that had these would decorate them with little outfits for different seasons, holidays, or just because. My friend has a variation on this, the desk goose. I don't have a desk goose, but I have other figures on my desk and thought why not add them to my holiday Halloween decorating with some tiny witches hats. So let's conjure up some. Most witches hats have a cone and then a circle that they can cut on the fold for the brim and where the cone enters. Now the hard part is figuring out what size should all of this be. And the really tricky part with this figure, weird ears. So there's a very little spot for the cone part to work, and then regardless of where the brim ends up, I need to cut holes for the ears. Not only that, I don't want to damage the figure. I don't want to glue it, so I'm pretty much going to do ribbon ties, I think, to secure it, because it's really just supposed to be some cute ornamentation. So let's go ahead and mock this up and see how we do. I'm going to just cut these out in paper first to see how it goes and try it out. Version 1. So this is based on the drawing, but it doesn't fit, which is fine. I don't mind the size of the brim. That seems pretty good, but the cone, in order to kind of fit down on the head, I'm gonna have to make the circumference of this part much shallower or much smaller in order to fit here. I don't mind the height of this either. I think the height is good. I just need to work on that part. I think this is about version 4. The circumference in here is much smaller. The cone height is about the same. Right now it's just roughly put together with some tape. The ear holes had to be pretty generous. It does fit, it just doesn't stay because the back ears want to go through. So I think once this is cut out and felt, if I do a little something like this, or so, you know, sew or glue to the inside, something like that would be pretty cute. And it's going to be felt. It's not even a stiffened felt. It's a, you know, a regular craft store felt. So it'll have play to kind of warp around the shapes. And I think that'll work. So let's take and transfer this to paper, which I've already done. The only thing I haven't transferred are the earmarks. I'm gonna try to do those a little nicer. Maybe use one of my circle templates to get something that just looks a little cleaner. And then I added some seam allowance. Didn't do a lot. I think I'm just gonna do some whip stitching to whip stitch this together instead of working with glue. Also in through here, I had to notch the paper out and fold it up to have that little seam allowance so that it would tape down. So you lose a little bit of the height that way, but it's fine. The proportions definitely are odd when compared to sort of the original, but it's an odd shape, so it had to be custom. And this is what we ended up with. So my next step is to go ahead and kind of transfer this, the ear holes to the template nicely, and then go ahead and cut these out of felt.
And here we are with more hand sewing. As foretold, I went with a whip stitch. Happily, the black thread pretty much disappears against the black felt. It doesn't make for great video though, so we'll speed this up and cut through it. The cone is sewn. I'll do a quick test fit to see where the cone should fit in the brim. Then I cut notches out of the bottom of the cone. This allows me to sew down the resulting tabs of the cone to the underside of the brim. The fun stuff, decorating. I used some ribbons and ribbon charms I had on hand for the perfect witchy vibes. Let's see how everything turned out in the reveal.
So my thoughts on this build. This, not comfortable, but maybe I'll find a use for it for something. This, very comfortable. It's lots of support. It's not biting in or chafing. Perfectly seasonal. I love it. I think it turned out really well. And slider. What the gold chain didn't have, this is adjustable. So I could even make it into a shoulder bag if I wanted to, adjusting it all the way. So, what do you think? Well, friends, that's a wrap on today's Halloween creations. I'm thrilled with how everything turned out. I'd love to hear what spooky creations you're working on this season. Share them in the comments below. If you had fun watching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps this little channel grow and keeps the algorithm spirits happy. Thanks for joining me on this adventure. I hope you'll come back soon for more DIY, thrifting, and crafty shenanigans. Craft your adventure.